She went there because home was a terrifying place. She had no idea what was actually waiting for her there. In December 2002, Masha visited them for the last time, and at that moment, it looked like the most ordinary visit. She went to this family regularly, and this exact circumstance, why she was even there in the first place, would become one of the key elements in the case 23 years later. Volchansk, a small town in the northern Sverdlovsk region, just a few hours' drive from Yekaterinburg. The population is small. Distances here aren't measured in kilometers but in familiar faces. Here's the school, there's the store, there are the neighbors 2 doors down. In places like this, everyone usually knows everyone, and that is exactly why what happened remained unanswered for so long. Masha was 11. She lived with a mother who drank, not just occasionally, but as a consistent lifestyle. Things at home varied. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes there was no food, sometimes it was just unclear what to expect by evening. For someone growing up in those conditions, the main survival skill is finding a place where everything is predictable, where you can just breathe. She had a place like that. A few blocks away lived the Semenov family, Vladimir, 23, and his wife. Masha met Semenov's wife and started coming over, infrequently at first, then regularly. She helped around the house, cleaned up, and sometimes stayed the night. No one thought anything of it. It's a common scenario. Adults taking in an acquaintance from a troubled family. Her mother knew where she was going. Semenov's wife knew. The neighborhood knew. There seemed to be nothing to hide. So, in December 2002, she came to them again, and no one ever saw her again. The night of December 11th, 2002. Inside the Semenovs' apartment, there are 3 adults, Vladimir, his wife, and his wife's friend. An ordinary evening, nothing that would raise any red flags. At some point, the women decide to head out for cigarettes and drinks. The store is nearby, it won't take long. 2 people are left in the apartment, Semenov and Masha. When the women return, she's gone. Semenov is calm. His explanation is simple. She went home. She got dressed and left on her own. He doesn't know exactly which way she went. He didn't walk her out. His wife hears this and nods. The logic doesn't raise any questions. It was late. It was time for her to go. And that, it seemed, was the end of it. So what if she left a little early? Her mother is waiting. Masha doesn't come home that evening. She doesn't come home the next day. An empty bed, a silent door. In a small town, people notice these things quickly. Neighbors, the school, mutual acquaintances. Nobody had seen Masha after that evening. Nobody saw her leave the Semenovs building. Nobody saw her walking home. As investigators would later establish, not a single person could corroborate his words. Her mother raised the alarm, and word spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors, acquaintances, the school, everyone who might have seen or heard something was questioned. No one saw a thing. Investigators opened a missing persons case. The first question was standard. Where was she last seen? The answer led straight to the Semenovs. Investigators headed there. Vladimir met them calmly. His story was exactly the same as the one he told his wife. She left on her own. He heard her get dressed, heard the door close. He didn't know where she went, and there was no reason to walk her out. His wife corroborated the story. They returned from the store, and Masha was already gone. No discrepancies in their statements. A steady tone of voice, no fidgeting, no unnecessary words. Investigators were looking at a man who either genuinely knew nothing or knew how to compose himself so well that you couldn't tell the difference from the outside. Was there anything to latch onto? No. So investigators started checking the routes between his building and her mother's house. They questioned residents in his building, neighboring houses, and people on the street. Searches were conducted in the city and on the outskirts, yielding no results. Semenov remained on the investigation's radar. He was the last person to see her, the only one alone with her that night. Everyone understood this, the investigators and Semenov himself, but an understanding, as the case files would later state, is not enough. You need evidence, and there was none. He wasn't aggressive, didn't cause scandals, and had no prior record. By all outward appearances, he was an ordinary young man, the kind you could find by the dozen in any town, and no one would find anything remarkable about it. Neighbors saw her at his entrance, saw her going in, sometimes coming out with bags, adults taking a troubled acquaintance under their wing. In small towns, this isn't rare. It's considered normal. People help how they can. That is exactly why nobody looked at this picture any closer than it demanded. Not because they were blind, but because there was no reason to. Semenov fit into a world view where people like him don't do things like this. When investigators brought him in for questioning, he didn't crack. He didn't show visible nerves, didn't get tangled in the details, and didn't change his story. He answered the questions, and only the questions. Nothing extra. The investigation pressed on the only thing they had. He was the last to see her alive. There were no other leads. She was at their place in the evening. The wife and her friend left. He stayed home, then she got dressed and went out. On her own, without a word, just like always. He didn't look to see which way she went. The door closed, and that was it. His wife confirmed it. When they got back, she was gone. She noticed nothing unusual before leaving or after returning. Investigators scrutinized every detail. The exact time the women left the apartment, the time they returned, the window of time Masha could have theoretically left. It's only a few minutes' walk from the Semenovs to her mother's house, and no one saw her along that route. There was no direct evidence, no signs of a struggle in the apartment, no witnesses who saw anything that night, no physical proof linking Semenov to the disappearance. Formally, his alibi rested entirely on his wife's testimony, and there was no independent way to verify her words. The circle closed. Pressing charges meant going to court with a theory, and only a theory. Without an evidentiary base, there is no case. It's just talk, and the investigators knew it. Semenov was let go. The case remained open, but it had nowhere to go. Then, 6 months passed, and remains were found in the woods. Here is what investigators didn't know in 2002, and what would only become known 20 years later from his own words. That very night, while the town was still completely unaware of the disappearance, Semenov hid Masha under the floorboards of his own apartment. He didn't transport her, didn't leave her somewhere on the street. He placed her beneath the floor of the exact house she used to visit, where there was a couch, a table, the smell of food, where it was warm. She remained there for several months. All that time, investigators were coming around with questions. His wife was giving statements. Neighbors were saying they hadn't noticed anything. Searches were ongoing, and she was right there, under the floor. And this specific fact, that everything happened literally right under the feet of those searching, would later become one of the most chilling elements of the case files. When the pressure died down a bit, Semenov made his next move. The remains were removed and transported to a forest area outside Volchansk, where they were exposed to fire. The case files mention relatives who participated in this, though investigators pieced that specific part of the puzzle together much later. The fire was meant to make impossible what 2002 forensics couldn't do anyway, but it's vital to understand. This wasn't an act of blind panic. It was a calculated sequence of actions stretched over months. The waiting, the disposal by fire, every step was separated from the last by time, which means every step was taken consciously. In July 2003, locals stumbled upon the burned remains in the woods. The investigative team arrived at the scene, a forest outside Volchansk. The crime scene unit goes to work. What they found were heavily degraded fragments. The fire had been intense and prolonged. The remains had lost their shape, their structure, most of what a medical examiner relies on. From the fragments, they could determine only one thing: the remains belonged to someone very young. Then, silence. Forensics of 2003 hit a brick wall. Extracting a DNA profile from heavily burned bone material was practically impossible back then. Not because nobody tried, but because the technology simply wasn't there. High temperatures destroy genetic material to the point where standard methods of the time yielded empty results. There was simply nothing to use for comparative analysis to establish an identity. What happened to this person before the fire? The remains held no traces that could reconstruct the timeline. Officially, investigators were looking at the remains of an unidentified individual, formally, a John or Jane Doe. In the town, of course, people put two and two together. Masha vanished in December. In the summer, this was found. Semenov knew what he had done with the remains, and judging by how events would unfold, he knew his plan had worked. The lab results came back empty. On all key fronts, no name, no cause, no link to a specific person. Just the fact that fragments were in the woods and nothing more to work with. The mother knew whose they were. The investigators working Masha's disappearance knew. In fact, anyone looking at both folders at the same time probably knew. But a criminal case isn't built on quote _0 _. It's built on proof, and there was none. The case of Masha's disappearance went into the archives, unclosed, suspended, formally alive, functionally dead. Her mother was left without an answer, not without suspicions, not without theories, but specifically without an answer, an official, legally binding answer. One she could hold in her hands, and this reality, that the answer was somewhere close but entirely out of reach, would drag on for 2 decades. The investigators did what they could under the circumstances, and Semenov stayed in Volchansk. He didn't leave, didn't change cities. He stayed right there, among the same people. A year passed, then another. You see him at the store, at the bus stop, in the courtyard. You just see him, and that's it. Semenov lived his life, walked the same streets, went to the same shops. Masha's mother most likely ran into him more than once. We can only guess what was happening inside her when she did, but legally, there was nothing between them. No verdict, no status, just a neighbor. Technology wasn't standing still, but it hadn't caught up to this specific case yet. The file just sat there. By this time, Semenov was in his 30s. Life went on according to its own logic, meaning outwardly, it looked like the normal life of a normal guy in a small town. And around this time, a new acquaintance appeared in his circle. A girl who was still in school. She wasn't even 14. This detail was revealed by Semenov's mother-in-law to a journalist, well after his arrest. She met Vladimir when she was 13, and he was around 30. They started dating, then they got married. Exactly how this happened, what the parents said, how they rationalized the age gap, the mother-in-law didn't go into detail, but she stated the fact bluntly, with no attempt to sugarcoat it. In a small town, something like this doesn't stay completely invisible, but it also doesn't trigger an official response. The mother-in-law said something else about what she feared when Semenov was eventually taken into custody on an entirely different case. She said their only fear was that he would get out and take the youngest girl, the youngest in their family. This wasn't abstract fear or general anxiety. It was a specific dread attached to a specific person in their home. These are not the words of someone who just found out something shocking. These are the words of someone who realized something a long time ago and had been living with that knowledge. Up until this point, Semenov's story looked like the story of one horrific night. Now, the picture was widening. As investigators would later discover, December 2002 wasn't the beginning, and it wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one point on a timeline that started earlier and continued long after. A few years later, he and his wife were taken into custody. The trial was held behind closed doors. The exact year isn't disclosed in public sources, but it's known to have happened roughly between 2012 and 2014. Semenov and his wife were arrested. Semenov was convicted of serious offenses against minors, and his wife was convicted as well. Both received prison sentences. When the mother-in-law reached out to Child Protective Services, they gave her a very brief response. "It's a good thing you don't know everything." CPS workers had seen the case files and concluded that the full picture was something people needed to be kept far away from. 2 cases, 2 sentences, 1 name. Masha vanished in 2002. Then came the situation with the 13-year-old. Then the closed trial, the prison term, and the words from CPS. Each of these facts could be explained away individually. Together they formed a single unbroken line. And while he was serving his time in another facility, in another city, someone with an archived folder on their desk was asking themselves a question. What if we try again? From 2003 to 2023, 20 years. That's not a metaphor, and it's not a rounded number. That is the literal amount of time Masha's file sat in the archives gathering dust. An entire generation grew up in that time. The kids who went to that same school in 2002 were now adults. Volchansk lived its life, a small northern town with small northern news. The case didn't make national headlines, it didn't cause a public outcry, it didn't spark investigative journalism. A regional story, buried in a box. Cold cases rarely come back to life. Anyone who works in law enforcement knows this, and anyone waiting on the other side knows it too. The more time passes, the slighter the chances that anything will change. Semenov had served his time for the second case and was released. And then, at some point, the Sverdlovsk Region Investigative Committee decided to open the box. Within the Russian Investigative Committee, there is a specialized unit dedicated exactly to cases like this. In 2023, the 2002 file landed on their desks. This wasn't a random review or one rogue detective's passion project. Over 20 years, forensics had evolved radically, and it became obvious that what was impossible in 2003 might actually yield results today. The only question was whether they still had anything to work with. They did. The degraded fragments recovered in June 2003 had been preserved all this time. This is standard procedure. Evidence in unsolved cases isn't destroyed, it waits. Investigators ordered a new round of comprehensive forensic testing using modern methodology, forensic medical, genetic, and medico-criminalistic analysis, each working independently but toward a single goal: to establish who had been lying in that forest for 20 years and what had happened to them. Simultaneously, standard investigative work resumed: site inspections, interrogations, timeline reconstruction. Alexander Shulga, a senior assistant at the Regional Investigative Committee, would later say that evidence was gathered meticulously across all fronts at once. The question remained: could the technology of 2023 do what was impossible in 2003? The previous failure wasn't due to laziness or human error, it was the hard limit of that era's tools. By 2023, that limit had been pushed. Modern methods allow experts to work with degraded genetic material that was once considered completely useless. It's not a guarantee of success, but it is a possibility, a very real one. Experts went to work on the fragments that had sat in an archive for 2 decades. The work required extreme precision and time. The material was compromised. Every fragment was processed individually. For comparative analysis, they needed a sample from Masha's blood relative. Investigators performed an exhumation, and a genetic profile was secured. The comparison process began. Parallel to this, they worked to establish the cause. Medico-criminalistic experts analyzed what was left of the bone structure, searching for traces the fire hadn't managed to completely erase. The results didn't happen overnight. Testing of this caliber takes time. The investigators waited. Then, the results came back, on both fronts. The first comparative DNA analysis confirmed a match. The remains found in June 2003 belonged to Masha. Officially, legally, 20 years later, it was her. The second medico-criminalistic analysis established the cause: mechanical asphyxiation. Someone restricted her airway until the fatal outcome occurred. The fire hadn't managed to destroy this information entirely. Enough remained in the bone structure for the experts to provide an answer. It was a devastating double blow to everything Semenov had built his defense on for 20 years. First, the anonymity of the remains was gone. Second, the lack of a known cause was resolved. The old narrative, "She left on her own, I don't know where," was now standing face to face with 2 airtight forensic reports. For 20 years, his story had survived on a technological limitation. That limitation was now gone, and investigators had a name confirmed by genetics. They had the method used, and they had the man. The man who was last alone with her, who hid her beneath the floorboards, and who later moved her to the woods. As the case files would later note, Each of these elements individually left no room for his old story to breathe. There was only one step left. By this point, Semenov was already back in custody, serving time on another conviction. Investigators came to him there. They presented the charges for the 2002 case. This was no longer "we suspect." This was concrete evidence. DNA, a definitive cause. The statements he gave 20 years ago now stood directly beside the experts' findings. During the first interrogations, he held his ground, the exact same behavior model as in 2002. Calm, no extra words, no visible panic. A man who knows how to wait. But evidence doesn't disappear just because you stay silent. Eventually, Semenov confessed. He confirmed it. Yes, he did it. Yes, she was under the floorboards. What the investigators had painstakingly pieced together over 20 years, he confirmed himself, and that confession entered the case files as an independent, standalone piece of evidence. He described what happened that night using a single word: a conflict. He didn't explain it, didn't expand on it, didn't clarify. Just a __quote, _5, __. As if that one word could somehow cover up what happened to an 11-year-old girl who had come to their house looking for a warm place to stay. The psychiatric evaluation was definitive, sane. He fully understood his actions and was able to control them. The case went to trial. November 25, 2025, Karpinski City Court of the Sverdlovsk region. Semenov is 46 years old. He is sitting in a courtroom for a case that began when he was 23. Exactly 23 years between those 2 points in time. The court took everything into account: the established facts, what happened to an undeniably defenseless victim, his previous convictions, the nature of his past crimes, the psychiatric report, his own confession, the final verdict, 25 years in a maximum security penal colony. Additionally, an 8-year ban on working with minors, and an order to pay 1 million rubles in compensation to the victims. The sentence didn't start on the day of the verdict. He was already in custody, so the clock had already started ticking. He didn't walk out of that courtroom a free man. Masha's mother got what she had been denied for 20 years. Not rumors, not neighborhood whispers. A verdict, a document with a date, a name and a sentence length. An official answer from the state. 23 years late, but an answer nonetheless. In that courtroom, the word conflict was heard for the final time in the defendant's testimony. The court noted it and delivered its ruling. As for exactly what happened in that apartment in December 2002, that word still leaves a gaping void. The court recorded the outcome, but the true context remains behind a closed door. An 11-year-old girl who went to them because it was too scary to be at home. 23 years of waiting. 25 years in maximum security, officially a __quote, _7 a word broad enough to explain absolutely nothing. But look at everything else we know. The girl he started dating when she was 13 and he was 30. The closed-door trial. This isn't the profile of a man who just made one terrible mistake. This is the profile of a man for whom children were a danger zone. Masha visited them regularly. She was a familiar face there. She saw how they lived. She was around long enough to notice things that weren't meant for outsiders' eyes. Or perhaps on that December night while the women were out, exactly what defined the core of his later crimes took place, and she made it clear she wouldn't stay quiet. This is an assumption. There is no official answer to the __quote, _8 __. But what was found under those floorboards was no __quote, _9 __. A man who lived with this for 23 years and never once cracked in public. That isn't a fluke. She found a man who everyone else should have feared. They just didn't know it yet. The evidence sat in an archive for 20 years until technology caught up. And the very fire that was meant to destroy the truth forever ultimately became the key to proving it. She was just looking for a safe, warm place. And looking back, those words carry a very different weight now than they did at the beginning of this story. Subscribe to our channel. See you next time.